I'm Doug Lichtman, and in this video, we're going to get started on copyright law. The right place to start is just a definition of what copyright law is. And copyright is a system of property rights for certain kinds of intangible objects, generally known as works of authorship. And let's just unpack that for a moment. Copyright law gives out property rights. This is our way of saying that when we give you a copyright, you have kind of dominion over the thing that's protected. It's your property. You can tell people they can't use it. You can allow people to use it. It's a property right. It's a property right, though, in intangibles, which is to say, I know we talk casually about like having a copyright in a book, but that's not quite right. A book is something, if I throw it at the wall, it makes a sound. But copyright really isn't going to the physical book. Copyright instead is covering the words, the phrases, the tone, some of the story elements. It's going to the intangibles that sure are stored in the book, but it's not really to the book. It's to the intangible. And in my sentence, I end it with this idea of works of authorship. Just have a phrase, the lawyerly phrase, that we use to refer to those intangibles. Copyright is a property right for an intangible, which we'll call a work of authorship. Now, before we dig into cases and talk the nuances of law, two really important ideas that we need to have on the table. The first of the two big ideas is the idea that copyright is only about copying. That kind of comes from the name, right? It's a copyright. And it's a right that stops other people from copying your protected work. Copying here might be copying in the form of directly photocopying. It might be copying in a little bit more of a playful sense, like I perform your play, or I perform your music, or I display your painting. But copying, the idea is, hey, I borrowed from you. I used your work to do my accused next step. And copyright is always about that. It's always about copying. The distinction here is a distinction between this legal system and a system that wouldn't care how we got here. Or to be really concrete about it, think of independent creation. If I independently create a work, I do it all by myself, I've never seen your work, I just do mine completely, no connection to you. If I engage in independent creation under copyright, that's an absolute defense. I cannot have infringed your copyright if I truly engaged in independent creation. I didn't copy, I independently created. This is different from other legal systems which might just look at what I did and compare and say, hey, your mousetrap looks a lot like my mousetrap, therefore it's a problem. Right? Some IP systems just look at the end product, not copyright. Copyright asks, did you copy? And if the answer is no, we're done here. If you didn't copy, there's no liability at all. Copyright's about copying. And again, lawyers will talk about this as independent creation. You could even be silly about it just to keep the idea in your head. You imagine you were born in an island and had no exposure to mainstream movies, mainstream television, mainstream books. If on that island you so happen to write a story that has a character named Luke Skywalker and he's got daddy issues and whatever it is, if it's true that you did it on an island and had no exposure, no problem. Copyright's only about copying. That would be an example of independent creation. Of course, I wouldn't believe you, but that's a separate question. Copyright is only about copying. Big idea number one. Big idea number two, copyright protects expression, not ideas. This is another one of the foundational ideas as we think about copyright law. What does it do? We say it goes to expression. And by that we mean, when we think about the things stored in your physical book, your word choice is your expression. Your characters that are well defined, that's your expression. The details of your plot, fine, that's your expression. But your idea might be something bigger and more abstract. It's a science fiction story, it's an adventure, it's a boy meets girl, boy breaks up with girl, boy gets back together with girl story. At some level of abstraction, it's an idea, and that we don't protect. Let's just think of a few quick examples just to add some meat to the bone. Imagine you wrote a book, How to Lose Weight by Eating Only Chocolate. The copyright in that book would go to the words you chose, the sentences that you wrote to explain this important idea, how you organized them, exactly how you phrased them. The copyright would go to your expression. But the copyright would not give you power over this concept, this strategy. So if I read your book and I learned this strategy of eating only chocolate but still losing weight, I could then go out and do it. Because that's the idea. Your copyright doesn't cover that. I could even open up a consulting business where I go ahead and teach other people to do it. Again, no copyright issue. I'm not taking your expression. Or do a more practical example. Think of a book like a biography of Harry S. Truman. The author of that book might do a ton of work, gather a bunch of information, learn a lot about Truman, spend a decade researching, and write the book. The copyright doesn't go to that hard work. It doesn't go to those bits of information. The copyright in a book about Truman would go to the phrases, the words, the paragraphs, the structure, those sorts of things. But the actual facts about Truman's life, even if they were found by that author, first revealed by that author, nope, still not protected. Copyright goes to expression, not idea. Now, these two big moves, the idea-expression dichotomy, this distinction between idea and expression, and this first move about independent creation, I plant those seeds with you right away because they're really important limits on copyright. Some people talk about copyright like it's a monopoly. It's like this really important property right. And it's important, but it's intentionally weak along these two dimensions. If you have a copyright, we could still have independent creation. Other folks could come up with something that might be really, really similar, no problem. And even if you have a copyright, all that protects is your expression. It doesn't lock up the idea. I could see your wonderful story about vampires falling in love with non-vampires, and I could decide, yeah, I want to write one of those also. That's your idea, not your expression. These two big points, the idea-expression dichotomy and independent creation, open the door to competition. It keeps copyright pretty small, pretty contained, such that we live in a world with lots of competition across similar properties. And indeed, you see this all the time. In 1998, there were two films in the theater separated by like a month, A Bug's Life and Ants, and they were both animated stories of singing and dancing insects. Now, I don't know the backstory. Maybe this was independent creation. Like there was something in the air in 1998 that led a lot of creative people to want to do animated stories about bugs. Maybe. Maybe instead it's the idea-expression dichotomy at work. One of these teams heard about the other and thought, yeah, that's a great idea. And they didn't take the characters, they didn't take the dialogue, and they didn't take the expression, but they took the idea and made a similar property. Indeed, 1998 is a great example of this because also in the theaters that year, we had Armageddon and Deep Impact. Again, two really similar properties. An asteroid's coming to Earth, we need Bruce Willis or someone like Bruce Willis to save us. Independent creation, idea-expression dichotomy make room for all of this, giving us competition. A famous kind of fight and a good reminder to you and me, think of Star Trek, Star Wars, and Battlestar Galactica. Again, on the one hand, there's some independent creation, idea expression dichotomy stuff going on, where it might be that these creative teams independently came up with some story elements, some ideas, some concepts that are similar but fine. They were independently created. It might be there was some cross-pollution across these properties, that the folks behind Star Trek saw Star Wars doing really well and thought, hey, I want to borrow some of those ideas. It might be some of this is problematic. There was actually litigation across these properties where different creative teams said, you know what, you took too much. You actually took some of my expression. And they fought about it for a while. All I want to say to you is, I guess, two things. One, competition. right? Because we have these escape valves, idea-expression dichotomy, independent creation, because we have these escape valves, we get competition like this. We don't just have one science fiction property, we have some variation in competition. And two, this is then an important way to think about copyright law. We're going to get the competition, and now we have to think about the exact contours of that competition. What is the idea here? What is the expression here? How much borrowing would we allow? Do we really believe that something in here was independent creation rather than one of these teams finding out about the other? Right? Actually adding the detail to these rules defines the kind of competition we'll then see in the marketplace. A couple other things I want to do just as we get started. We've planted our two big ideas, the distinction between idea and expression and independent creation. I also want to think just for a moment about why we have copyright at all. That'll help us read cases and argue about cases over time. And it turns out there are two big theories people use for why we have copyright in the first instance. One theory, and it's a theory that has a lot of traction in Europe, is a theory that people describe as the natural law theory or a moral rights theory. And simplified a little bit, this theory says, look, your creative output, the stories that are captured in your books, your films and so on, your creative output, we should really think of that the way we think of a child to a parent. Right? This derives from you. You have some sort of natural connection to it, some sort of moral authority over it. This comes from you, from your work, from your labor, from your personality. And in Europe, that's kind of the launching point for copyright, because in those systems, the move is, of course, we're going to recognize rights in your story, in your song. It comes from you. The other big theory, though, in copyright, which is more of a US thing, is a theory about economic incentives. And this theory says, look, I want to motivate people to create works of authorship. And even more, I want to motivate people to distribute works of authorship. And to do that, I've got to give them at least some rights. I'm worried that if I don't give you any rights at all, you won't have the motivation to take those steps. And the challenge here is that the work of being an author, writing the book, making the film, the work of being an author, it requires an investment of real resources. But if I didn't protect the output, you wouldn't be able to protect the value of that work. You'd do the work, you'd create the book, you'd do the work, you'd film the film, and then other people would just say, thank you, and they'd take it. And so in the US perspective, copyright comes in and says, hey, I want you to have an incentive to be an author. I want you to know that if you're willing to put in the work, you're willing to then bring that work and make it vulnerable by sharing it with us. If you're willing to do those things, I will protect you from copying. Not all copying, not perfectly, not forever, but enough to give you the right incentives that you create the work and you distribute the work. And again, the fear is that if we don't do this, authors won't do their part. You'd work hard in your book, you'd finally get it out, and if it was terrible, no one would copy it. And if it's great, folks would take it without asking, and they'd mass produce it and do whatever they want to do. We don't want authors to be in that kind of systematic loser position where they do the work, but they don't have control over the output. And so copyright comes in and gives them some property rights, some exclusive control as a way of giving the incentive to create and to disseminate. We'll protect you if you bring it out and make it vulnerable to copying. Now, a lot of the legal rules, no matter which way you go, natural law on the one hand, economic incentives on the other, a lot of the rules, you'll get to the same place. You'll say the same things, but not all. So like in Europe, for example, if our theory is moral rights, it's mine, it's like my kid, we might quickly say the law should require attribution. My name should be on that, forever, it's mine. In Europe, we might say, it's my kid, so I should control it kind of forever, as long as it has economic value at least, as long as people care about it culturally at least, I should control it, it's mine. Whereas if you come to the US system, those two examples, we might hesitate. right? Maybe you should put your name on it, maybe you shouldn't. Let's think about whether that should be a rule or an option. How important is that to the incentive system? Even more, think about how long copyright should last. In an incentive system, I should make it last long enough that you were properly motivated, but not a minute longer. If giving you protection for 20 years is enough to get you to do the work and share it with me, maybe I should stop there. We don't, it turns out, and we'll talk about it. But for now, I just want to frame these two perspectives. Natural law, which is more of the European view, thinks about this as an extension of your personality, and that's why we're protecting it. US law, by contrast, thinks about incentives. I want to give you just enough rights, just enough control that you do this hard work, and really nothing more. Because after you've done it and shared it, if we've given you enough, gosh, now I'd like other people to be free to use it. I'd like it to go and be enjoyed by others and built upon and shared and criticized and everything else. Economic incentives might take us in a different place. Two big theories. Last thing I want to say in this introductory video is I want to remind you that we should always think about whether we really needed the legal system at issue. Here, copyright. And here's the story I want to just point out to you. There was a time in like the early to late 90s when a lot of folks said, I hear you, Lichtman, authors need to be rewarded in order to give them incentives. But folks said, let's not use copyright. Copyright, after all, limits the flow of intangibles. And all else held equal, how unfortunate is that? Right? Once you record a song or a movie or whatever it is, one of the joys of works of authorship is it's really easy to share it with a lot of people. Unlike a pizza pie, where if I eat the pizza, you can't, and if you eat it, I can't. Works of authorship, it's wonderful along some dimensions to not have them locked up. Get rid of copyright. We could all watch the movie. We could all listen to the song. And so in the 90s, a lot of folks were saying, look, I worry about authors, but let's not do it through copyright. And they'd say, we don't need to. If you make music and we didn't give you a copyright, you'll still be fine. You can have a concert. Or if you make a film and we didn't give you copyright, you'll still be fine. You could always sell lunchboxes, t-shirts, action figures. There was this move to say, maybe we don't need copyright to incentivize authors. And I want to point out to you for two reasons. One, it's wrong in ways that help us understand why we do need copyright. And two, it's something good to keep in mind anyway as we think about running businesses in this space. So let's do both. Why is it wrong? Well, it's wrong in the sense that, I do my example about music. For Madonna, I think we could say, Madonna, in a world without copyright, just do more concerts. You'll be fine. And I think that's probably true for Madonna. Concerts allow her to make money. She can keep people out. There's always some big person at the door who says, ticket please. She'll do fine. But I like copyright anyway, because there are a whole bunch of bands that can't make a living that way. They have a small number of fans, not enough to fill a giant stadium. And copyright means that they can sell one album in Cleveland and one album in Detroit and two albums in Tallahassee. And by selling their music, the actual thing we're excited about, they can still make a living. They don't have to make the second best adjustment of giving away the music and hoping they can pull together their fans in a way to make money in some other way. The music is the thing. That's what the people value. Copyright lets them monetize that. And again, for Madonna, it doesn't matter. She has other options. But copyright says we're going to welcome all sorts of artists and not only support the ones who have that other option. Think along the lines about action figures. George Lucas in Star Wars, it turns out he made his money in the action figures, not the films. He cut a deal with the studio where they kept most of the money from the film, he kept the money from merchandising, and he laughed all the way to the bank. Fine, that works for him. But think about a movie like, I don't know, the Lincoln, right? The movie about Abraham Lincoln. I would love a Lincoln action figure, maybe you would too.
No, we can't do that, said Mr. Lincoln. Yes, we can, said George Washington.
But we can't imagine that we'd film a film like Lincoln based only on the hope of the action figure sales. and obviously so too for other things, certain dramas and all the rest. Action figures works for George Lucas, much like concerts work for Madonna, but is that a replacement for copyright? No. It points out to us the magic of copyright. I don't have to make money on my movie through action figures. I don't have to gear my movie to that in order to make a movie. I can actually make a movie so long as you're willing to pay enough to come see it. Copyright lets us really do the things, these works of authorship, that copyright is protecting. Now, I said there's another payoff, which is let's not forget this stuff anyway. So if we're working with someone who is doing music, or someone who writes that book about how to lose weight by eating chocolate, we should remind them copyright isn't your only weapon. You might make a bunch of money on copyright. You might also make money on consulting, on speakers' fees. There are all these other ways to capitalize on the momentum you've created. And maybe that would make you not lean so heavily on copyright. Maybe you want to give away some promotional copies of your book. There are other cool ways to monetize, it turns out. Maybe you want to look at book sales and say that's only one piece of how I will be rewarded, and build your empire accordingly. Point is, I don't think these replace the need for copyright. However, these are pieces to these industries that you and I should keep in mind as we're thinking about how to really bring an interesting property into the world successfully. It's a mix of copyright, performance, speakers' fees, sequels, prequels, lunchboxes, t-shirts, and so much more. All right, that's our introduction to copyright law. Big points for this lesson are the idea-expression dichotomy and independent creation. And we'll dig into the weeds in future videos.